Sunday again, March 31st, I assume. I'm filming this on the 30th, so I assume it's the 31st when you see this. Good day. Happy Easter. Here's the continuing saga of all this material that I am deeply invested in writing. Moth, PowerNerd, Axolotl, Ruby Quaker Show. The update for this week, I guess I would like to summarize what happened with the drum tracking recording for PowerNerd. Happened last week after 12 days of assembling and writing this record, which is unheard of, I guess, in my world, to be producing content at that speed. The outcome of that was a type of energy and a type of material that is not overthought, and frankly is really cool. It's a little early to tell unequivocally, because what tends to happen when you're making a record is it's like there's a razor's edge of it working and then not working, that you tend to sort of ride that cusp of until the minute it's released. You can spend all this time doing great edits and great recordings and performances and lyrically and arrangement, and at any point in the process that can be derailed or compromised. And so there's this undercurrent of anxiety with making records that I'm sure those of you who make them will relate to. A bad mix can completely ruin a recording. You know, there's so many different variables. One of the things that I recognized upon doing the drum tracking for this, so I had an engineer, Jakob Herman, come in from Sweden. And it's the first time we've worked together, but I was impressed when we met each other on tour a couple of years back by his fastidious nature. So his attention to detail when it comes to tuning and drum selection and phase and things like this was what I wanted to attempt with this recording, in hopes that perhaps that would work for Moth as well. And we had 2 days to record, we had 1 day to rehearse, and it was guerrilla style the whole way. But we made it happen. And Jake, I call him Jake, did a fantastic job. And the drum sounds that we've gotten, that I'm just starting to put together now, are actually among the best that I've managed to get, just because of the attention to phase and the attention to like things such as cymbal selection. When I first started recording, it was just such a privilege to get into a studio that it didn't really matter what the drum kit was like. It didn't really matter what the board was like, or what the preamps were like, or even what the player was like to a certain degree. But as I've been making records for so long, the things that make or break a drum performance and a drum recording now are things like tuning and the consistency between songs for the tuning, and making sure that the tuning of the snare is complementary to the key of the song, finding the right skins, cymbals specifically, going through cymbals and finding the crashes, because a lot of times the right hand crash is, you know, a fairly ubiquitous instrument in rock music, and therefore if it's being hit on the quarters or the eighths, if I'm not careful with the cymbal selection, you often get lost in the room, because while you're tracking it just sounds big and washy. And then when you go back later, you realize that perhaps the cymbal that you chose for your dominant crash has got some nasty overtones in it. Like, every cymbal is different and its own beast. So we spent the majority of the time the first day with cymbal selection, the type of skins that we chose, the sizes of the kits. We had 3 or 4 kits down that we were able to go through each and try to determine what would be most complementary for the PowerNerd aesthetic sonically. I was fairly adamant on wanting to have a low tune snare for a lot of the mid-tempo thing, because a lot of the ways that PowerNerd had been written was to sort of take advantage of each hit. So the interval between snare hits was written for the most part so that there's enough room for the decay to be pleasant. The up-tempo stuff is a little different, and for that we would typically choose a higher tuned snare. But going through and getting those cymbals and the right ride and the right hi-hats, and because cymbals are just so obnoxious, right? And it took me many years to recognize the value of cymbal selection, and also the touch of the drummer and the room that you're in, and those frequencies really compile, and phase as well. So if we're fortunate enough, which we were able to record at a studio with a fantastic live room, Armory Studios in Vancouver, where I frequented for many years, and you want to take advantage of that room if you've got your mid-side microphones and your overhead microphones and your tom top and tom bottom and your far rooms and your there's a figure 8 stack in the middle of the room of microphones. That's a lot of different microphones that receive the sounds at a different interval just based on their proximity. And another thing that it's taken me many years to recognize is the importance of phase. And so in layman's term, I guess the best way to describe phase would be lining up through delaying certain microphones the source sound and how it's represented in the speakers when it plays back. So if things are out of phase and you've got microphones everywhere, the best way to describe it is the sound is not cohesive. It's like you've got all those microphones, and I think when I was younger it wouldn't have made a difference. But now, and specifically with a record like PowerNerd, where it's very focused and there's not a whole lot in terms of layering, if all those microphones that capture a beautiful room are in phase, if all their offsets are set and all the phases are set so that when we're listening back they're all playing in harmony with each other, time alignment wise, the effect is this cohesive, deep, rich sound. But if the phase is off, then it's like it sounds the same in a way, but it doesn't sound cohesive. And these are sort of the lessons that I would say that doing 30 some odd records has taught me. And the devil's in the details, right? So getting phase correct and getting cymbal selection correct was very important. And fortunately, Jake was the guy to do that. And Darby, who didn't know the material prior, on the way over from the UK, he scored it all out so that we could reference it as a piece of sheet music, and that way we didn't have to learn it all. But the problem as well, and these are things that I think it's interesting in this video series to discuss, is little things that, again, I wouldn't have known prior to having made all these records. So the PowerNerd demos were done so quickly, like with the amount of time that I had, and with the just the schedule being like you need to record something, get it out, record, get it out, in order to capture the momentum and capture the whole ethos of making a record without overthinking it. The demos that I made, at the time that I was recording them, I was like, oh, this will do. This is fine. But what I didn't recognize until we got into the studio was the flippant nature of how I recorded the demos contributed greatly to the sound. And so when we take the drums and we score them out and we put them in a big, beautiful room, and then we edit certain aspects of it for it to be tighter, and Darby as a player is exceptionally tight, so it's not even that we had to do much of that, but just because it was a tight performance and it was in a great room and everything sounds good, all of a sudden when I listen back, I'm like, oh, it's too clean. It's too pristine. The thing that I had assumed was a liability with the demos, i.e. the speed in which it was created, ended up being an integral part of its appeal. So from there, you have to, and what I've done is I've gone through the drum performances and said, okay, so this part here on the demo, maybe I'd left out a single kick, or maybe in the verse, something that I had jammed out with the drummer in a rehearsal space. That would be cool if we had like a triplet feel on this kick section here. And then when I hear it back, I realize, oh, what actually contributed to the original vibe of the song was the fact that it didn't have that. And I have got notes, little post-it notes on my computer and on my desk to remember to keep it simple. And not simple in terms of the song and the arrangement, but just don't do what I typically do. And that is the nature of recording. For those of you who record, you'll understand this fully. It requires listening to the same piece of music endlessly, over and over and over again. Whether or not you're editing, or whether or not you're recording, or you're arranging, or you're putting vocals down, or you're doubling vocals. Regardless, the act of making a record requires you to listen to the music over and over and over and over again. And the learning process of PowerNerd, it's funny to even say it, makes me realize how the act of recording in and of itself in the past has compelled me to make things more complicated. And the reason for that is I just get bored. You know, you listen to something over and over, and then after a while it loses its allure. When I was younger, when I was making a record, I would listen to the demos over and over and over. Like, as I was recording, I would get a board mix, like from the recording desk, and I would put it in my car, and on the way back from the studio, like during Infinity or Synkestra or anything, Key Addicted, even more recently like that, and I would listen to it relentlessly over and over. And I think what ends up happening is by doing that, that's when I end up changing things. I end up listening to something, and the original appeal of a chorus being just a straight ahead melodic statement with hard rock drums, after listening to it 300 times in a row, you're just like, oh, fuck it, we'll just put some weird synth on there, we'll put some staggering beat on it, or what have you. And it's just to keep me entertained after listening to it for so long. And I've got some buddies that used to say, they used to call it the jam killer. Like if you were in a blues jam with somebody and everybody's going E, E, A, A, B, B, A, A, E, you know, and then somebody throws in like, well, here's an F7 or something. We call that the jam killer. And a lot of times, you know, the dude that puts it in, or the person that puts that in, oftentimes it's because they want to be more clever. They'll give you the knowing look when they throw it in, like, eh? And you're just like, yeah, I know, I guess it's clever, but it kind of sucks. And so my tendency to throw a jam killer into a recording has been based in a large part due to just fatigue of listening, which I have to do. So recognizing that with PowerNerd has been interesting. The benefit of it is I've got Axolotl recorded, so when Moth and PowerNerd are finished, I've got this delicious little weird project that it's nothing but jam killers. And I love that because I love sound design and weird tonalities, and I love that. But there's really a time and a place for it. So with PowerNerd, as I'm going through, I'm listening, and first off, I don't want to be premature because it is just in the formative stages of getting the recording together. And as I said before, it can be touch and go as to something working or not. But I'm, pretty blown away by it in a weird way. And I'm more intrigued by my interest in it. I think in the past, through, how many times have I said during this? If you count it and let me know, that'd be great. In the past, on Ocean Machine, there's songs like Life, or on Addicted, there's Super Crush, or gosh, a Stagnant, or Sit in the Mountain, Where We Belong. I've always loved those types of songs. And so I originally thought that PowerNerd would be a vehicle for those types of songs, which, while I'm writing a glut of material, which I have done for Moth and everything that's going on with this period, a bunch of those songs appeared. So I archived them, and then when I was in that 2-week period of arranging and writing, I used the momentum that came with that pressure of self-imposed pressure of writing that quickly to get a common aesthetic with all those songs. And I kind of love it. And specifically for something that was originally an afterthought, in a way. It was originally like, well, I've got these songs, so I might as well get them out before I dig into Moth and dig into Axolotl. But by really focusing on it and really putting my mind to making that one the best it can be, and by forcing myself into a psychological state that required me to complete it all in a time frame that was finite, it established a consistent energy and a type of excitement to the music that I haven't felt in music that I've written for a long time. Not that the things that I've written recently I dislike at all, and not that I like this more, but there's a type of frenetic energy that comes from the parameters that were established with this PowerNerd thing that is frankly really cool and urgent and heavy, not in the thrash metal kind of strapping way, but heavy in terms of the relentlessness of it. It's more hard rock than it is heavy metal, but more heavy metal tonality, I guess. And it's really cool. And this is why, as I get out of the studio and I listen back to the drums, I'm like, oh, what made that section work in the demo was the fact that it was just a repeat of that. It didn't do anything fancy there, or any of these moments. And so now it's about trying to make sure that before I get into the guitar and bass recording, that I've got the fundamentals aligned with that vision. Because in that 2 weeks when I was writing, the vision was so clear because there's nothing else that I could think about at that time. There was just so much work that was involved with it. But as soon as you step away from it, it's easy to be like, oh, maybe we'll add this song. And because it wasn't written during the same period of time, it's like sticks out. And then by having it in there, all of a sudden it makes you more prone to complicate the ones that are not complicated already, just so that one will play ball. So it's a balancing act. There are a couple of moments on the PowerNerd record that are, I sort of throw the beat, I displace the beat, but I try to make sure that if you're in the groove, it displaces itself without you falling out of that groove. And that keeps me interested. But those things were written during those 2 weeks, so I can rationalize those as not being jam killers, but just being cool little features on it. The lyrical aspect of it, now what I've done with it is I recorded the choruses, left the verses out, really tried to make the verses and pre-choruses small for the most part. And I really tried to make the structure of it such that the structure wasn't a jam killer either. Like here's a 72 bar midsection that changes keys and modulates and all this sort of thing. again, I can do that with the Axolotl and I can do that with the Moth, but with this, I really like the idea of not having that. And the reason I like it, I think, is the act of writing this and the act of writing the lyrics in the chorus make me realize that I think when we're in a vacuum, and the vacuum, for the sake of this analogy, is you have a lot of time to write. When you're in that vacuum, I believe that you can construct, against your own better judgment, a narrative of your own trip, your own personality, that is flowery. In that vacuum, you can assume that, okay, well, I'm this type of person. I'm always compassionate. I'm always kind. I'm a vegetarian. Whatever your trip is, I think you can really structure that if you've got time, and to the point where you believe it yourself. But without that time, what I recognized that really was enlightening and empowering is that narrative that I've created of myself and my own work has been just that. It's been sometimes more flowery than the truth. And when I have no time and I have to deliver, again, self-imposed, but nonetheless, I recognize that maybe my true nature is a little different than that. Maybe I am more over it. Maybe I am more cynical. Maybe I am as a kind person, but it's not without thought and effort. And maybe there's a part of that cynicism that I had assumed wasn't there anymore, that is actually very much there, and it just required those boundaries for me to make peace with. And by making peace with it, it's a great experience because it's freeing in a sense. You're like, oh, I always knew that, actually. I knew that maybe fundamentally where I was at as a person at this age is less idealized than I've been trying to convince myself of. No less caring, I would say, but definitely rougher around the edges than I expected. And so what the energy of the record ends up feeling like at this stage is it's heavy in the ways that I'm heavy now. So of course I'm capable of doing, thrashy stuff or whatever, but if you don't feel it, it can often come across as being disingenuous. But when I was left to my own devices and wrote, I realized that a lot of the material for PowerNerd is really heavy, but it's not that type of heavy. It's more, when I first started, I loved Motorhead, right? I was always thinking it's got to be somewhere between like Metallica, Motorhead, Enya, and Def Leppard. And that's sort of what it's turning out to be. And I gotta say, it's a lot of fun. And then once it's done, it's delivered May 30th, and then I'm back into the Moth full time. And I've really enjoyed it, and I'm continuing to enjoy it. But it is a fine line between it working and just being, and it not working. And that's what I'm in the process now of keeping it in that very narrow window of inspiration, where it required that momentum, it required those boundaries, it required all those things. Lyrically, it kicks my ass, and I haven't even started writing the lyrics yet. What I've done is I've just bulked in the sentiments for the chorus and not done anything with the verse. I've got a basic idea, but what I did on each lyric sheet is I wrote a one-word descriptor of what the song is about. Love or loss, or maybe one to 3 words. And again, trying to keep that on track is important too. It's not about controlling the sentiment, but more about making a subconscious decision as to what the intent of the song is, and then just keeping it in your mental RAM, so that when you're writing, it is it impregnates all that you're doing with that intent. But there's certain emotional things that I realize here. I'm cruising towards 52 years old next month. And a lot of the things that we feel when we're kids, I realize again, it's been a fascinating experience, this PowerNerd thing, because it has forced me, I didn't have the time to overthink it, so it made me have to confront aspects of my nature that were always right there, that I either didn't want to see or couldn't see or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? And one of the things that I remember is, when you're a kid, you have your first love. You fall in love for the first time. And that's an experience that it's so magical. It's like, it's completely all-consuming. At least it was for me. It's like, the other people, and it's like this, the magic of other people and all of these things it's so primal and it's so delirious, right? And then as you get older, it's not that goes away, but it's the edges get softened. It gets replaced by love that you have for your kids, or the love you have for a long-term partner, and the things that you glean happiness and vitality and rewarding moments from, oftentimes have more to do with, for me at least, discipline as I get older than it does the like that wild passion that exists as one of your first formative experiences with any emotion. And although I'd be foolish to think that I could reconnect with those emotions, I mean, it's no longer really a part of my life. It's just what happens as you get older, right? There is a part of me, though, that recognizes that although the intensity of those emotions can perhaps not be adhered to similar things, it's like there's no desire to go out and get in another relationship or anything. I mean, God. But there's something about that if you can hold on to, and I'm in the process of trying to define what it is about that energy that I can now bring into where I'm at this point in my life. What is it? Is it the frenetic nature of it? Is it the manic nature of it? Is it the rawness of it? Is it the fact that you have no defenses, in a sense, against it? And so all you have are your instincts. And by being able to draw from that, perhaps that's what it is. Perhaps that's the answer to it right there, is the events are going to change, but your instinctual connection to the emotional components of any circumstance are rooted in a similar mechanism. And so getting in touch with that requires dropping a lot of the shit. And I notice when I'm tracking the vocals, because I've started some of them, it's right when it's not affected, like with an A, affected. I think that there's like a certain amount of drama that comes with delivering vocal lines that you end up, it becomes a technique, right? Like if you have a vocal line, you're like, the sun is so bright today. It's like there's this performative aspect of that I think in the past, and I can certainly forgive myself for it, but in the past, I can forgive myself for it because I think it was appropriate. In the past, I would do those things, and then I internalized the idea that, well, that's how a good vocal line is delivered, with that kind of gravitas, right? But I find when I'm cutting the shit, that doesn't exist in this record. But then the technique is like, well, how do you deliver it with intensity without that? Because a lot of that performative vocal technique it makes it easier to get a good sound because you're really landing hard consonants and you're really, articulating your words. And it's easier to get a performance, and it's easier to line up multiple tracks. And without that, it's like, oh, there's the intent. There's the intensity of that. But, how do we make this work? So, I've been working with a company called Roswell Microphones. And Matt, the guy that's his company, right? He came to my studio and he's built me a prototype for my vocal that we sat and we worked on a signal chain and we worked on a bunch of different capsules for it. And it's great. It's amazing. All I have to do is I've got 2 settings on my preamp. I got one for loud vocals and one for quiet vocals. And between this kind of thought process that goes into how do you orchestrate and organize these kinds of sounds so that they represent the intuitive nature of your connection to your emotions, requires a certain microphone sound too, right? The nuance of it all is really, really fine. Like, it's very fine. And in a sense, that's also why I appreciate the PowerNerd record as well. Because it's not a complicated statement. It's not complicated music in a lot of ways. It's always complicated in, more so than maybe people who aren't like me. But in my own work, it's pretty straightforward, this one. So it gives a very broad framework for me to be able to experiment with a lot of these things. But man, it's a fine thing. Making something that's rooted in, like, that kind of relentless, focused, bam, 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 bam type of song structure and sound. As soon as you start to adhere your process to it, you're like, now it's too clean. Now it's too refined. Now it's too safe. Now it's not explosive enough. And that vocal line, although it sounds better, it lost the impact. It's a fun experience, and I'm loving it, man. And I absolutely love my job. Thank you, all of you. As is every week, I hope your projects are going well. And this coming week, I'll be working on tracking the guitar, rough bass, and then I'm going to go to a studio with a buddy of mine where I can crank up an SVT and record the bass properly. I don't want to do it with Sims. Same with the guitar. I've been recording with a DI here so I can reamp. And KSR sent a really crazy amp called the Orion, and we're gonna mic that up as well as a couple other things. It's muscular. It's like, it's not a wimpy sound. There's so many things to say. I'm gonna keep going. No, I won't. I'll talk about it next week. Guys, take care of yourselves. I'll see you soon.